It's Wednesday, June 25th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. Man, a little out of practice here on the intro. Back from vacation, back from Disney World, back from being sick after Disney World, because I feel like that's like a rite of passage. But I'm very excited to be back talking ball, and joining me to do just that here today is my good pal, my good friend, Scott Pianowski. Scott, what's going on, buddy?
Not much. Yeah, this will not be a Mickey Mouse episode. This will be big league episode that will probably lead to your fantasy domination in 2025. This will be the most important show that we do. I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But this is if we nail this topic, it's a very important thing. It will move the needle for fantasy.
It will. We got a big show to get into here today. We are continuing our Flip the Script summer series. For those that are new to this, we're essentially looking back at the biggest fantasy surprises and disappointments of 2024 and trying to identify who we think could be this year's version of that. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a little bit like, hey, we're making fun of the who's this year's whatever, but we're also, again, trying to find who is going to be some of the biggest surprises of this season. And I especially want to say that for our topic here today, Scott, which is we're trying to identify who's going to be this year's Bucky Irving. And it's most likely not going to be a rookie. It could be a rookie. We're just looking for a legit late round running back that becomes a fantasy star. Our guy could be a rookie, like I said, but we're going to analyze mostly guys on rookie contracts here on our group. Before we get into the topic today, Scott, I do just want to explain why this episode is going to be my least favorite, but also maybe my favorite of the series. The reason I think it's going to be my favorite of the series is because, number one, like, fantasy is chaos. And the reason that this player will hit is most likely because of some sort of chaos. It's an unsettled backfield, an injury happens. That's part of that is why Bucky Irving rose to prominence. Also, we just get to discuss a lot of like random players, and I love that. And like you said, we're not going to be talking about some big names here. We're going to be talking about some guys who are absolutely going to do nothing this season. I always find that enjoyable. Why this is going to be my least favorite is, well, for one, we're probably not going to get it right. There's almost no chance we're going to identify who this year's Bucky Irving is. Secondly, I almost didn't want to do this topic, and I've said this, I've made jokes about this on the show. It's on my radar that like every big fantasy account and some non-big accounts tweet about Bucky Irving like he's, the Lord God himself, like after having this great season. And the reason, besides the fact that I'm just cranky, the reason that this bothers me, Scott, is because, and this is going to inform the next thing we're talking about here, I know that those same accounts will be so willing to turn on Bucky Irving if he has like a moderately disappointing season this year. So, and like when we all sit around, like, why do players not mess with fantasy football? Like, why don't they understand fantasy football is so good for the league? It's because of that right there. People love to build up a hero and they love to tear that hero down. So that's like on my radar that when we talk about Bucky Irving in this way, that he's like this, they literally putting him on the pedestal. People are going to be so quick to knock him down off that pedestal if he has a moderately disappointing season. And I just hate that. I hate when that happens. So I had to get that off my chest before we get into this Bucky Irving topic here.
Yeah, totally understand. And I guess the thing that gives me pause for this episode, although again, we're talking football. Any day I'm talking football with Matt Harmon is a good day, and it'll make me smarter and more prepared for my fantasy drafts. And today is going to be a great primer for the running backs you're going to be thinking about drafting the second half of your draft. That's basically what we're doing today. We're talking about guys you may not know a lot about. Some of them are rookies. Some of them haven't played much in the league. But what is challenging and really unknowable about this assignment is so much of running back value is going to, when you talk about the guys you take as lottery tickets, or maybe even guys you pick up before the season, it's going to be, okay, somebody got an opportunity because somebody else got hurt. And there's no way to know. And we're coming off a season where the running back position was unusually healthy. Christian McCaffrey, of course, was a brick with the number one overall pick that started in week one with the Niners lying through their teeth about who was going to play and all that stuff. So if you drafted McCaffrey, you were out of luck. But if you said, you know what, I like old running backs, and you targeted these guys, they did so well last year as far as being productive, staying healthy. And it was a very low attrition season at running back. Nobody expects that to continue. It just feels like a massive outlier. But ultimately, if you know who's going to get hurt, and there's just no way to know this stuff. Running back, playing in the NFL is dangerous, and you can get hurt on any play. You can get hurt with no contact. You can get hurt. Your foot lands the wrong way. There's so many things going on with why injuries happen and don't happen. And yeah, some players are probably a little bit more injury prone than others, but I've gone from, I used to see this kind of binary. This is a durable guy. This is not a durable guy. Yeah. And now it's like, I think a lot of it is unknowable. It's in a big mesh, and guys, maybe some players take care of themselves better. Maybe some players eat better. Maybe some players sleep better. Maybe some players are more dedicated to their craft, but you can't get in the NFL without being super talented and being serious about it. Because if you were a joke about it, you just get run out of the league really quickly. So at the end of the day, the names that I don't know, we're going to talk about 8, 10, 12, 14 guys, something like that. The best piece of knowledge you could have is which one of these players is going to be tied to a backfield where the other guys get hurt. That's just stuff we can't know. We're never going to know that. We could try to make an intelligent guess on it. It's a wild freaking guess to begin with. So what we're trying to do is introduce you to who are the guys, because no matter what this is one thing I want to impart on you as we try to figure this out, right? And then we can get into the meat of the show. It doesn't matter if you're robust RB, where you're taking them early. You're hero RB, you're taking one early and backing off. You're zero RB, you're going to go at other positions. You'll come back to running back. No matter what your ethos is at running back for building your roster, you're going to take a lot of guys a lot of your bench players are going to be running backs. Even bad fantasy players know this. It doesn't matter what your upfront strategy is at the position. You're still going to be interested in these guys, and they're going to be, and not only that, when you pick a lot of these players, you'll get nice pick, because they become kind of boutique players in some circles.
Totally.
Because people will plant flags on these guys, and people want to be first. As soon as the draft was happening, people were planting flags, even before the draft, because some people are nuts and will draft before the draft. Flags are being planted. So these are, no matter what your strategy is, no matter what your roster build is, if you even have a roster build, some people just go out and draft by the seat of their pants. Whatever works for you, any strategy can work if you pick the right players. But no matter what your build is, these are all going to be running backs that I think every fantasy manager is going to be fighting over.
And frankly, we might be fighting over them during the season, right? Because I mean, this is like best ball season right now, where you're drafting 18, 20 rounds, something like that. But for your regular typical leagues, a lot of the players we're talking about here are not going to get drafted. I mean, Bucky Irving was not drafted across a variety of leagues, so this could be like the guys you're trying to keep on that waiver wire speed dial. So hopefully, if you have a great memory, which I certainly don't, but if you have a great memory and you're sitting here on June 25th and you're like, oh, remember Matt and Scott talked about this guy who's in this situation and the starter just got hurt, like let me really think about that when it comes time to putting those waiver bids in. But let's talk about Bucky Irving in retrospect before we go into this year's candidates and we flip the script to 2025, because I think he fits right into everything that we've just talked about here, Scott. Bucky Irving, at closing time last year, when drafts ended, he was the running back 53. He was 170. He was the 172 overall player off the board. I mean, that was incredible, because he ended up finishing 10th in overall rushing yards. He was running back 14 in total half PPR scoring, but he was the running back 6 from week 12 on, after the Buccaneers got back from their week 11 bye. This was not a player, like you said, people planting flags and all that. I mean, there were certainly some people that liked Bucky Irving and thought he was a good sleeper in last year's draft class. I always remember at the Fantasy Football Expo last year, Scott, when we were drafting, we drafted 2 teams that took all damn day, but at some point, somebody took Bucky Irving, and I remember Patrick Doherty from Roto World saying, Bucky Irving's probably like the best pick in fantasy this year. And at the time I was like, what? Like, what a crazy thing to say. And Pat could not have been more right. I wish he had said it on like a show, put it on some viral clip, but it was just like a throwaway comment during the draft. But that was just where Bucky Irving was last year. So Scott, like, what were the building blocks that took Bucky Irving from being the running back 53, not even a guy that would get drafted in every league, not even close, to being a guy that was running back 6, one of the best players in fantasy in the money time of the season?
Yeah, shout out to Roto Pat for getting that. I don't remember that quote, but I'm sure if you say it, it was accurate. And what a great thing. It's also cool.
Oh, he whispered it. He whispered it. He didn't say it with his chest. Or he just like kind of, like I said, a throwaway comment. I was just happened to be sitting like 2 people down from him.
It's cool that Roto Pat said it, because I know a lot of people who could have said that who would have dined out on that ever since and, never stopped talking about it. So we were lucky that Pat Doherty was about as easygoing a guy and just as grounded a person while being still a very fine fantasy analyst and just a good dude. So Irving, what happened? What went right for him last year, right? It turns out he was probably better than Rachaad White. He was tied to a Liam Cohen offense that moved the ball well. Bucky Irving could run the ball. Every run you want, run inside, run outside. It was a dynamite pass catcher, and came into the league with pretty decent college tape too. I mean, we saw what he did, Oregon, right, at the end of his college career, where he was a dynamic player who showed both the ability to make splash plays and also to handle. I realize that Tampa Bay did use White. Also, it's not like Irving got ridiculous volume, but he's somebody who could be a featured back. He has and some of these guys we're going to talk about today, have body types that I wonder if they could handle anything past like 11 to 13 touches a game reasonably. Right. But Irving, inside, outside, splash plays, all packages, offense we really like, coordinator we really like, in a team that was scoring at will at the end of the season and needing to, because the defense wasn't that great either. So despite White not, it wasn't like a McCaffrey situation where White just got hurt, was out of the mix. White was playing in most of these games, but it was a case of Irving being better and the team being proactive enough to say, Rachaad White's not a bad player, but Bucky Irving gives us a better chance to win. So I think it's harder for this year's Bucky Irving to do it on merit to beat somebody out. I think it's more likely things fall in place and there's going to be an injury, because sometimes teams need that to actually change their view of their depth chart. But man, and by the way, Bucky Irving, I was the anti-Pat Doherty. I'm not sure I had a Bucky Irving share last year, which is not a fun thing to admit. It was not a fun show to watch because he was basically trampling me in the fantasy playoffs here, left and right. But I tried. I liked Bucky Irving, but sometimes liking a player isn't enough. And the people who put their necks out for Irving certainly were rewarded. Now, as you say, Irving, I'm sure in some leagues was drafted and dropped, right? And that's another thing.
Sure.
You always have to be constantly. I always say whenever you look at the waiver wire every week and the waivers are run, I always look at the drops, especially once bye weeks start, because that's when people really start dropping guys they don't want to because they feel desperate. They're 1-3, they're 1-4. Guys don't play this week. Guys are hurt. So once October hits and people start dropping the guys they don't want, we all a lot of times talk about rookies getting better in the second half of the year when they know their way around the league a little bit. Running back generally is onboarded more smoothly for rookies because it's not as complicated as the other positions. So it's less, it's just less of a hurdle there for those guys. This is a handful of things they need to know, where it's just so, obviously a quarterback's job is so complicated and the receivers have more complicated lives. But yeah, Bucky Irving, just saying his name gives me a little bit of the heebie-jeebies, because last year I had a mediocre fantasy season. I'd probably give it a B- or something like that. And part of it was not being in on the Bucky Irving experience.
Yeah, I actually had much more Rachaad White than Bucky Irving. And Rachaad White wasn't worthless last year. That's what makes this I don't think we're going to find a clean this year's Bucky Irving, because Rachaad White was still running back 24 in total points last year. There were times where you could play Rachaad White because this was just such a fruitful backfield, but still, it was an unsettled backfield. I think that's something we're looking for in this year's candidates. We're looking for an unsettled backfield. I do think we're also looking for a rushing ecosystem that can overall take the leap. And man, there was no running game that had a bigger turnaround than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were 32nd in rushing success rate the year prior in what was a pretty good offense with Dave Canales at the controls, and Rachaad White wasn't the most efficient runner, but he was really useful as a pass catcher, which is why he retained a lot of fantasy value last year. He just was never the runner that Bucky Irving was. I mean, man, it was apparent very early on that Bucky needed more touches. But also, again, it was Liam Cohen taking over as the offensive coordinator and just turning that rushing ecosystem around. It was also the offensive line. That's something that we should pay attention to for all of our this year's candidates. Graham Barton was a revelation at center last year. I love Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving's a great player, but Graham Barton, I think, is a bigger part of what turned around that run game than just hey, we took a running back in the 4th round who ended up being much better than that. But Ben Bredesen was really good as a free agent signing. Cody Mock took a step in year 2. Luke Gadecki took a step as well. So this was a full-on effort, and that's, again, something we should be looking for our this year's candidate. Before we toss to our first break and start talking through some of our candidates here, Scott, just give me a quick 2025 outlook for Bucky Irving. Any cause for concern as Liam Cohen moves on? Otherwise, though, a lot of continuity on this offensive line in the offense overall. Current ADP for Bucky Irving is running back 9, 21st overall. You have any hesitation on clicking Bucky Irving's name this year, even if you missed out and I missed out on having him in last year's fantasy process?
Yeah, I want to point out that White was running back 24 in basic scoring and running back 22 in half-point PPR. White did not have an insignificant season. He was just beat out by a better player, but White still had a role on the team last year and will have a role on the team this year. In addition, they kept all their veteran receivers. Evans is still here. Godwin's still here. They drafted Egbuka, who's a good player. McMillan was spreading his wings at the end of the season. Cade Otton is going to probably take 5 or 6 touchdowns off the table. Mayfield will run a little bit. There's a lot of different ways to spread this offense out. And so Irving is going to be the head of it's not going to be the Bucky Irving show. He's going to be the head of a committee because Rachaad White is going to play. So just be careful with, a lot of times we want player career arcs to be like a plane. We want, you take off, you get a little bit higher, you get a little bit higher, you get a little bit higher. Okay, Bucky Irving, he got to a certain level last year. He's a plane taking off. He'll get better this year. It doesn't always work that way. And obviously they're on their 3rd different offensive designer in 3 years because they keep getting rated. Last year I was worried about Dave Canales leaving, and I do think Dave Canales is a good coach, and we'll talk about him a little bit later today. But then Liam Cohen looks like he's probably maybe even sharper or more interesting than Canales was. So we'll see. Obviously, teams so often promote from within, so you have, at least it's the same infrastructure that's there. And also, whenever you have a veteran quarterback, he's part of the offensive system too. He's almost like the de facto offensive coordinator. Every time people panic about, what are the Lions going to do without Ben Johnson? It's like, well, Jared Goff still knows the plays he likes. They'll still call those plays, and he's throwing to the same guy. So that at least mitigates some of the Ben Johnson fear I might have with the Lions, or some of the Liam Cohen fear I might have with the Buccaneers. But Irving, to me, is not proactive or fade for me. I'll take him when it makes sense. I'll probably have some shares just so I'm not shut out of it this year. But I can't say right now, pounding the table, oh yeah, I'm smashing the Bucky Irving ADP right now, because that would be false.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And just on the offensive coordinator changeover, they did promote from within. They promoted Josh Grizzard. What a name to say. Mm-hmm. Josh Grizzard from Lizard Lick, North Carolina, by the way, is where Josh Grizzard is from. So what a piece of trivia there. He was promoted from within. He was apparently he was the pass game coordinator last year and had a big hand in designing the 3rd down offense. So again, somebody who's very steeped in this system. And because there was such a bad breakup between Liam Cohen and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think a lot of people have forgotten this, but remember that, Cohen was committed to going back there, and then he kind of like snuck his way to Jacksonville to take the interview. Because of that, they pretty much didn't let him take anyone with him assistant wise. He had to go and pluck from other trees to build out his coaching staff, which probably is going to be fine in Jacksonville. But that just, again, hammers the point that there is a lot of continuity, even if one guy's not there. And that one guy is very important to Liam Cohen, but a lot of continuity in Tampa Bay. But that's true in the running back position as well. Rachaad White's still going to have a role. They love to talk up Sean Tucker. They think he's one of the best, reserve backs in the league. I don't think he's going to have a big role, but he's at least going to be part of the proceedings. I'm with you that I think Bucky Irving is, I'm not going to rank him as not a top 10 back. I mean, I'm looking at the guys going behind him. Him and Josh Jacobs are back-to-back in overall ADP. Bucky Irving is 21, Josh Jacobs 22. You can maybe flip those guys. I don't really care, but I'm not going to put a Chase Brown, a Kyron Williams, a Breece Hall, a James Cook, or any of those players ahead of Bucky Irving. So I think he's totally fair where he's going right now. He should be a 2nd-round pick. Just, again, if he's a mild disappointment from that, I don't want to see all these, fantasy accounts that are overly glazing Bucky Irving right now, taking him to the woodshed if he's the running back 16 or some nonsense like that. Let's all be respectful here, people. But I think we are on the same page here, Scott. We're both kind of just like, yeah, he's I'm not saying like flag plant player. I got to take him in the 2nd round every time, but he's a totally fine 2nd round pick.
And I'm so glad you mentioned Sean Tucker, because let's not forget this offense was so good that Sean Tucker, totally unheralded player out of Syracuse, gets 192 total yards and 2 touchdowns against the Saints. I know the Saints were kind of a clown car after week 2 last year, but 192 and 2 out of nowhere. He had I think 3 touches on the season before that week, and for the year 6.2 yards per carry. I mean, he's looks like a guy who can play, and I would think he's going to take, I don't know, 2 to 4 touches a week. Maybe he's going to have some kind of role. I mean, he'll probably play special teams. He would need major injury attrition to have any fantasy value. You won't draft him in anything short of a gigantic sized league. But it just goes to show you, especially at running back, this is no more true that running back is so much more true than maybe any other position. There are so many talented guys who are just waiting for an opportunity. Teams, the 3rd or 4th running backs on some of these teams are really talented guys who could be, and this is why running back is so different than every other position in fantasy, right? Because when Tyreek Hill gets hurt with the Dolphins. It's not like, okay, well, there's like a 90% Tyreek Hill ready to go. Let's get him in there and play him. But anytime we can look at 10 to 12, 10 to 15 touches from a guy who was on the bench, injury has forced him into a role, that guy immediately is going to be at the top of the waiver shows. It's somebody we start immediately for fantasy sight unseen, because opportunity is everything at the running back position. And these guys are plug and play. Unless the team is horrible, unless the offensive line just has no chance and the team isn't trying to run the ball, the moment there's a change at the depth chart because of an injury, it doesn't happen to other positions. Yeah, it may happen in Baltimore. If Mark Andrews is hurt, Isaiah Likely is somebody we're really excited about all of a sudden, although they're good at different things. But the way running backs who have no value come into value when one guy gets hurt, it's different than every other position in fantasy.
As Scott mentioned, there's a lot of talented depth running backs around the league. We're going to talk about a lot of those guys here in terms of trying to find who's this year's Bucky Irving, and we're going to do that right after our first break. All right, welcome back. We just looked back at Bucky Irving's breakout rookie season. Now it's time to flip the script to 2025. All right, let's lay out our qualifications in terms of who can be this year's Bucky Irving. Like I said, we can't just limit it to late round rookie running backs. So we're going to be talking about a bunch of names that are absolutely never going to matter. Some guys who probably aren't even going to make the damn roster this year, but qualifications to be this year's Bucky Irving. It's got to be somebody who is currently outside the top 40 running backs in ADP. Reminder, Bucky Irving was drafted as a running back 53 last year and finished very, very strongly. So some rookies that are not going to be eligible, guys like Ashton Genty, Amarian Hampton, RJ Harvey, who a lot of people compared to Bucky Irving during the draft process. Caleb Johnson, the Ohio State guys, those guys are not going to be eligible. But Scott, we're looking for somebody who has a realistic path, an opportunity to finish as maybe a low-end running back 1, high-end running back 2 in fantasy in 2025. So I kind of grouped into 3 categories here. I grouped sleeper rookies, unsettled backfields, and injury-based lottery tickets to sort of talk through. Let's talk through this sleeper rookie group first. We don't need to necessarily go player by player. I'm just going to throw them all at you before we try to get to 3 finalists and vote on it as we usually do here for Flip the Script. First group here, like I said, sleeper rookies. Number 1, Bhayshul Tuten, running back 41, so just barely makes the cut because I think a lot of people have their eye on this player as this year's Bucky Irving because he plays for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are now coached by Liam Cohen. I've got Jaydon Blue, Dallas Cowboys rookie running back 43. Jarquez Hunter, Rams running back 61 right now. And then Devin Neal, another sleeper rookie with the New Orleans Saints, running back 66. Those 4 names, Scott, I throw them at you. Which one maybe stands out potentially above the others?
Yeah, it's going to feel like I'm cheating because I'm taking the guy with the most expensive ADP, but it's certainly Tuten. You mentioned Cohen, who was the architect behind the Bucky Irving story last year. And also, it's not just Cohen, the tactician. It's Cohen new to Jacksonville. He inherited all these players, and Tuten is somebody he had a hand in drafting, right? I would assume he'd have a say in who they pick. So it's like, okay, do I want to play the guys who I inherited, who were kind of ordinary talents, or is it somebody who I drafted who maybe percolating to the top of the depth chart? And Tuten, 5'9", 206, you might think, well, can he be a featured guy? He was featured at Virginia Tech. He showed up at the combine and impressed with a really good vertical time and 40. CJ Spiller is his player profiler comp, which I guess you could take as a negative or a positive. I'm going to view that as a positive. Tuten is a player, again, I talked about, as soon as the draft happens, people start flag planting. I think a lot of people were planting on Tuten, and people can't wait to get Travis Etienne out of town. And I know didn't Tuten fumble on his first snap from minicamp or something like that? And all these people walking back their Tuten takes from 48 hours earlier. But when you take a coach who's shown he's not afraid to elevate talent, changes teams. This is a guy he picked versus guys he didn't pick. The ADP is just outside the top 40, so it's the ADP kind of lines up. And I like the tape I saw from Tuten at Virginia Tech. I when I saw this list when we were working on the script before we got the show going, I thought, okay, I don't know how Tuten isn't going to be one of the 3 finalists.
Yeah, I think he's the favorite. That's why he's the most expensive running back in ADP right now. Now, at one point, I think he actually was like right after the draft. As you said, a lot of people wanted to flag plant him very early. I think he actually was the top Jacksonville back in ADP in like the early best ball drafts and things of that nature. But now that there's been some coach speak about Travis Etienne, they've said that, he's going to be great in the screen game. He's a super important player for us. Liam Cohen has said, like, I don't understand why there's trade rumors out there about Travis. We're really happy to have him in the building. He's now running back 35. So he's at least no longer the top Jacksonville back going off the board as Bhayshul Tuten. But he's a guy that, speaking of flag plants, James Gladstone, the GM of the Jacksonville Jaguars, who, man, really loves to talk, he said that he actually brought up Tuten in his interview to be the Jacksonville Jaguars GM as a player that he would like to target. Now, they also wanted to draft RJ Harvey before Sean Payton got up there and got his guy very early, more earlier than people expected. He took RJ Harvey. So, it's just that doesn't mean that Tuten's going to be the starting back for the Jaguars, but a flag plant player for the front office, certainly fits within the ethos of a round 4 rookie, just like Bucky Irving, who maybe doesn't profile as like an obvious feature back, but really exciting player is Tuten. EJ Snyder was on the show at the Combine with us talking about him as a very, very talented back who certainly fits the profile of a sleeper. Stat from our researcher Jonathan, Tuten averaged 6.59 yards per attempt on A-gap rushes over his final 2 seasons, second most by a running back drafted in the first 4 rounds this year. Bucky Irving was a monster on gap runs last year. So again, there might be some system fit here. Even I'm not quite sure if Tuten totally fits as a gap scheme runner, but Cohen's a guy who's going to marry the scheme to his personnel as well. So I agree with you. I think he's got to be like a favorite for this award, because also, Scott, last thing here, we're looking for a running back who plays for an offense that is going to outkick its expectations. And, that was certainly Tampa Bay, which was 5th in EPA per play last year. They were a good offense the year before. They took another step forward despite offensive coordinator changeover. We're hoping that Jacksonville can go from like 19th in EPA, into maybe pushing towards top 15 or something like that, bare minimum, with all the additions and the great players they have on that side of the ball.
And somehow we got through all of this without mentioning there's another X factor here. Tank Bigsby is part of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he had some moments last year with that team that was obviously going nowhere. And, when you make up your mind how you feel about whether it's ETN, it's Bigsby, it's Tuten, you have to ask yourself a question about Trevor Lawrence, right? Is Liam Cohen going to get the most out of Trevor Lawrence? Liam Cohen was part of the resurrection, Canales too, of course, the previous year, part of the resurrection of Baker Mayfield's career. I don't know if people remember exactly that Baker Mayfield's career was basically on zero. I mean, he had bottomed out. It looked like he maybe would never be a starter in the NFL again. And then he has a really great comeback year 2 years ago. And then last year he had a fantastic season, will probably stand as his greatest season. But it's just amazing that the Browns, they had Baker Mayfield once upon a time. He had a bad shoulder. They had a bad season, and they decided to make a bunch of bad decisions, including getting rid of Baker for basically nothing and signing a quarterback who can't play to the worst contract in NFL history and making the worst trade in NFL history to get there. I digress. When you come down on Tuten, where you come down on ETN, where you come down on Bigsby, a lot of it is going to be, do you see, because if you're going to sign up for these guys, you really have to sign up for Trevor Lawrence on some sense. You can't say, well, Trevor Lawrence is going to be mediocre, but I want their running back. It doesn't work that way. You need the team to have buoyancy. You need the team to matriculate the ball down the field. So before you make a statement on any of these running backs, you're asking yourself how you feel about their offenses. And in Jacksonville specifically, how do you feel about Trevor Lawrence?
Yeah, that's going to be the pivot point for any Jacksonville Jaguars discussion, is how you feel about Trevor Lawrence. And I'm with you that I don't want to just assume that Lawrence is what he is so far, because Mayfield gives us a great example of sort of that like turnaround point. And I think we forget that, Mayfield was really solid to start his career. And I certainly forgot this when talking about him during his stint with Carolina, where he was unplayable. But man, there's a lot of quarterbacks went through the Carolina Panthers that are having success elsewhere, Mayfield included, Sam Darnold, now the current starter for the Seattle Seahawks. But one rookie running back I want to talk about, because I agree, I think Tuten's going to be one of our finalists. And I hate to do it because, producer Colin, it's going to make him happy. But Jaydon Blue, running back 43 with the Dallas Cowboys, does stand out to me. And I think the first thing that people will say here is, well, he's small. He's not a feature back type. Maybe he isn't a feature back type. That being said, Bucky Irving was 5'9", 192 pounds when he measured at the NFL Scouting Combine. And Jaydon Blue is 5'9", 196. So that doesn't mean that Jaydon Blue is Bucky Irving from a skill set perspective, but size-wise, we just saw a dude who maybe isn't necessarily the prototypical size at the NFL running back, go ahead and have this season that we're outlining here as one of these great breakout seasons in Bucky Irving. Jaydon Blue also is in an unsettled backfield as well. They've got Javonte Williams. They've got Miles Sanders. Okay. I mean, and this looks like an ecosystem, Scott, that could take a big leap. They were just in terms of EPA last year, they were 29th was the Dallas Cowboys. Obviously, Dak Prescott got hurt, but they also weren't off to a great start when Dak was under center. I'm interested to see what Brian Schottenheimer does as the head coach and full-time play caller now, but they also brought in Clayton Adams from the Arizona Cardinals. They drafted Tyler Booker as the right guard. So with Adams coming over from the Arizona Cardinals to be the offensive coordinator, getting a promotion from their line coach, run game coordinator, and this is a big, badass offensive line of Cooper Beebe and especially Tyler Guyton take a step. I think the passing game is going to be good with George Pickens in the mix here. Checks a lot of boxes in terms of what we are looking for in Jaydon Blue as a late round sleeper.
Yeah, I'll sign off on Blue as a sleeper, but the problem I have with him is that, like, if you compare his final year of college with Irving, I mean, Irving had, I think, like 75 more touches in that neighborhood with one fewer game. Blue was always a rotational guy at Texas, yes, undersized, right, had a little bit of a fumbling problem. And I do think the shape of the obviously he doesn't have much to beat out. They have such ordinary veterans in front of him. I also think Dallas has a chance, despite having Micah Parsons. I think the defense could be mediocre. And if Dak can stay healthy, and that's been a problem for the last few years, yeah. But if Dak's healthy, man, obviously CeeDee Lamb is a god. If they can just get George Pickens to accept that he's not the number one guy, if he can live as the number two, I could see real carnival potential with the Cowboys. And maybe Dak has one of those seasons where he throws 650 or 70 passes, 700 passes, and Blue could be the guy who makes a lot of sense as a pass catcher, as a hurry up back, that type of thing. So I could see him being very useful. I just don't see the path for him ever being a workhorse. I don't even want to say bell cow because there's like 2 or 3 bell cows in the league now. Right. And that's kind of a dead thing. But to me, it's like, is Jaydon Blue going to be 10 to 13 touches, or can he get up to that like 15 to 17, 16 to 18 touch? I just don't know that he has the body type and the resume to handle that threshold. So that means I can't put him as a finalist on my clipboard, but I think he's very draftable because I think I see a lot of 33-30 football coming with Dallas, and I think Jaydon Blue's skill set will fit well, and he'll be, again, as like kind of like that Sigmund Bloom, what the heck flex. I think we'll be saying that with Jaydon Blue a few times this year.
Yeah, he was much more productive as a receiver. And I think that's where he'll have some fantasy value this year. Because if he gets on the field, I think it's going to be in passing situations where, again, he was very productive as a receiver in college. So I think he probably doesn't necessarily fit the bill here in terms of this year's Bucky Irving. But there's a lot of overlaps with the situation, with some of the things I outlined. It's just, is he as good as a runner as Bucky Irving? Probably not. Even if people do think he can play above his size, that's sort of where I think the comparison ends, and that's a pretty critical part to the whole thing. But I agree with Scott. He's probably not a finalist, but certainly someone that I do want our listeners to be drafting in the late rounds because it's an unsettled backfield. If he has passing down value, he's going to have some value in fantasy, especially if he, just beats out one of these veterans like Javonte Williams or Miles Sanders, for some of those passing down touches. But I want to throw these two other. Go ahead.
So I'll throw out one more thing. I was talking to my buddy Chris, who's a really good fantasy player, the other day, and he was looking for an underrated possible stack. I just want to throw this out there. This just really has nothing to do with our conversation today, but we settled on Dak Prescott with one of the receivers, one of the pass catchers in Dallas, is kind of the underrated stack that you might be able to get at an affordable cost. I just want to throw that out there as something that I'm interested in.
I'm getting really high on George Pickens this season, man. I just got finished charting him for reception perception. There were some times last year where he was so good. There was the usual George Pickens BS, where everybody knows the George Pickens experience, but I really do think he took a step as an individual player last year. It was really hot and heavy in the first part of the year, and then ironically he had that terrible game against his now current team, the Dallas Cowboys, where it was just a lot of like loafing and and just, again, the George Pickens experience. But man, if he's dialed in, he's locked in, I feel like he could have a T. Higgins type season, where he is the number 2 receiver on an offense that's throwing the ball all over the yard, and he just wins a lot of those like X receiver plays, and he could score double-digit touchdowns this year. So yeah, I do think that obviously, like, can you get CeeDee Lamb on your fantasy team is going to come down to where you're drafting in the damn first round. But George Pickens could be a guy who I still think at this point, like, he's currently not going in the top 30 receivers. I do wonder if he's going to be one of these hype bunnies in the offseason. Actually, excuse me, he just crossed into like wide receiver 29. I do wonder if he's going to be one of these hype bunnies in the offseason because he's already had a good mini camp. The Cowboys love to talk about themselves. Pickens is a very easy player to like in practices because he makes these crazy catches. Could he end up climbing ahead of some of these names that we have here? Certainly. But I do want to be like proactive on getting Pickens on some fantasy teams this year.
Yeah, I wouldn't even mind having Prescott and Jake Ferguson. And I hope that this wide receiver trade, this Pickens trade, turns out better than the Jonathan Mingo trade.
Shoot, I hope it turns out better. I hope it turns out better. Well, shoot, that's a low bar to clear. I hope it turns out better for a lot of like former Steelers that go elsewhere. Let's hope it turns out better than the Deontay Johnson trade. Let's hope that George Pickens isn't playing for the Texans during the playoffs or the cut.
The crazy career that Juju Smith-Schuster has given us. Man, Juju Smith-Schuster used to be the man. He'd be like a first or second round pick. It just feels like 100 years ago.
Yep, I remember fighting the Juju Smith-Schuster wars where I was a big loser and then kind of a big winner. So that's the way teams go. That's the way things go, man. But anyways, let's get back to running backs here. Two more rookies to throw out here. Jarquez Hunter from the Rams, like I said, running back 61. Devin Neal from the New Orleans Saints, running back 66. The reason I wanted to throw these two guys out there, Scott, is because I do think they're behind entrenched starters. Jarquez Hunter behind Kyren Williams. Devin Neal, of course, behind Alvin Kamara there, a legend with the New Orleans Saints. They've also got some other younger players. Kendre Miller is still on the Saints roster. Blake Corum, the Rams took last year. But this does feel like two backfields that need kind of a second punch. And I think that there's a reason to think that Neal could outkick Miller. And I think that Hunter could bring an explosive ability to the Rams backfield that they desperately need in their running back room. So I don't know if these guys are finalists, but I think they're two names to mention here.
Yeah, certainly names to know, right? I mean, the Saints, Kamara's a back nine player. They look real. Man, I don't know what they're doing with Shuck, and I would have just gotten bad and hope that they get Arch Manning next year or whoever is the number one pick. I mean, right now Manning looks like he could be that guy, but there's a lot of football to be played, and he hasn't played that much at Texas. We don't really know what he is, but Neal a little bit on the slow side. He's been comped to Kareem Hunt, which is I see that as a compliment.
Yeah,
and the Saints generally. I know Kamara had some big touchdown seasons earlier in his career, but in the second half of his career, they've moved away from him scoring the short touchdowns. There's been some years that Taysom Hill would steal some of those. That's not going to happen this year with Hill's career kind of in jeopardy right now. But Miller did so little as a rookie. Now it's for a coaching staff that's gone. Maybe he'll impress the new guys, but I would certainly be interested in Neal. I think in a lot of leagues he won't be drafted, but he'd be somebody who would be at the top of my waiver wire speed dial. With Hunter, generally McVay likes to have one back, and Williams has been so good there that you can't see him losing the job. Corum, I thought was a little bit disappointing as a rookie. Another guy who's a little bit on the slow side. So maybe Hunter, if Hunter could at some point get ahead of, we don't always know this, right? Like Williams managers might say, okay, well, I'm not a handcuff guy, but some people are, running back insurance, whatever you want to call it. The question may be at some point this year, is it better if you're a Williams manager and you had that spot to insure him? Would you be better with Hunter or Corum? That may be a question you have to answer. Right now, Corum would probably have to be the guy just being the incumbent. He's been in the league for a year, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that Hunter could be a better player, could be more dynamic, have a higher upside, and the team would ultimately view him as their feature back if Williams were to get hurt. Now, I just think Hunter's not going to have any value at all if Williams doesn't get hurt, but he's still a name to know. And again, he may be a name that we're looking at as a possible insurance policy.
Yeah, I really do think he's just a name that our listeners should know. He averaged almost 6 yards per carry on inside the tackle runs and 6.44 yards per attempt outside the tackles in college. That's, again, another research note from Jonathan here. And like, that's what the Rams need. They need a little juice from their run game. I don't know that that's necessarily always a Kyren Williams problem, but fantasy players have always seemingly wanted somebody to take Kyren Williams' job, and then Sean McVay just loves Kyren Williams. But the fact that they've invested in running back in back-to-back years, I don't think that tells us nothing. I think they do want kind of a second pitch here. And Hunter, I think, makes more sense as a seemingly like complimentary guy to Kyren Williams, maybe more so than Blake Corum does. So I don't think either Hunter or Neal are our finalists, although they certainly, like I said, we're not going to get this right. So certainly one of these guys could end up being this year's Bucky Irving, but I do think there are names for our listeners to know. We're going to take one more quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk through some unsettled backfields and injury-based lottery tickets right after this. All right, we talked through our sleeper rookie names to know. Let's get into the unsettled backfields. I've got 3 names here on this one, Scott. One that you mentioned, Tank Bigsby, running back 45. I don't think he's going to end up being a finalist because we literally already have a Jaguars running back. That would be a little weird if we're voting between 2, but it's just worth noting, hey, it could be Tank Bigsby is the guy that is the top back for Jacksonville, he was better as a runner than Travis Etienne last year, and I think he kind of gets overlooked. I've taken in like very, very early drafts, just thrown like a 13th round pick at Tank Bigsby on the off chance that he ends up being the lead back here. I also wanted to throw out Jaylen Wright, running back 52. Not because like this backfield, maybe calling it unsettled is stupid because Devon Achane seems like he's the top guy, but I don't think that Achane, they can just run him out as the lead back again this year after he wasn't that efficient last year. I think they need another pitch along there. And weirdly, Jaylen Wright is kind of forgotten about when people were excited to draft him last year when Raheem Mostert was on the roster, and Mostert's gone now, and seemingly no one wants to draft Jaylen Wright right now. And then lastly, Roschon Johnson at running back 54. The industry has finally just admitted that DeAndre Swift is going to be the lead back for the Bears now that Nick Chubb signed with the Texans. And, like we've kind of all just gotten over the fact that the Lions dumped DeAndre Swift. Maybe that wasn't a Ben Johnson thing. He's running back, I believe, 26 right now, but Johnson could have a role on this team, Scott. So these were 3 names that I wanted to throw out there as some late round guys who could be sleepers this year.
What's interesting to me about Johnson is that his yards per carry was really bad last year, but he actually had, per Pro Football Reference, a higher success rate than Swift, which just speaks to what they were asking Johnson to do. He was doing a lot of short yardage, pick up the yard, pick up 2 yards. I can see Johnson easily leading this team in rushing touchdowns. It's going to be hard for him to be the Bucky Irving because I just don't see an expansive role for Johnson. Even if everything went wrong for Swift, I think he would be part of a committee. But I could see maybe 7 to 9 touchdowns for Johnson is very possible. With Bigsby, he was a capable receiver in college, and then Jacksonville just hasn't used him that way in the NFL. So I'm curious to see if Cohen, who obviously threw to his backs constantly last year at Tampa Bay, curious if they can coach up Bigsby as a capable receiver. And obviously part of that will be, do they trust him as a blocker? That's a skill you need to be on the field in those packages. So maybe that is part of the hurdle that Jacksonville couldn't get over with last year, but certainly worth watching. And I'll admit I'm a little bit scarred with Wright because last year they pick a speed merchant. They've had such good luck with those. Mostert's a very fast player. Obviously, Achane is one of the fastest players in the league. Tyreek Hill, they're a track team down in Miami. I thought, okay, Jaylen Wright, if one of the 2 running backs behind him needs any kind of time off, and you would think they're going to, Jaylen Wright will come into value. And the problem is every time Jaylen Wright played, he'd seem to do something wrong. He'd miss the hole. He'd put the ball on the ground. He'd miss a blitz assignment. I mean, his rookie year could not have gone any worse. But sometimes just he's a post-hype guy, right? I mean, the market has adjusted. You're getting him for nothing. There's going to be a lot of leagues he's not drafted. With Mostert gone, I know they added Alexander Mattison, who nobody thinks anything of. I mean, we're not going to talk about him in this show otherwise. Development is not always linear in the NFL, and some guys don't know what they're doing their first year, and then second year, third year, the light goes on, and we're spoiled sometimes. I talked about the running back onboarding being simpler than other positions. It doesn't mean everybody's ready to play the moment they join the NFL. So I think we have to be mindful of Wright. The player here I'm most interested in is Johnson because I don't think there's anything special about him, but I could see him being there if whoever converts the first couple of easy touchdowns for the Bears, I think it's going to be the button they keep pushing. And remember, the Lions, everybody knows that Gibbs is their special back, is their splash play back, is their ankle breaker. But David Montgomery always had a role and was always the favorite to score from in close. They kind of realized that Gibbs could handle those plays too. And I realized Montgomery was hurt for part of last year. But I'm trying to talk myself into Roschon Johnson having like a 7 to 9 touchdown season. I really do think that's in play.
Okay, I agree with you, but before I agree with you, I just want to note about Jaylen Wright, too. They drafted Ollie Gordon on day 3 of the draft this year, who's like the complete opposite of their normal type. he's 6'1", 226, and he runs a 4.6. Like, we think Miami backs that, yeah, they draft all these fast dudes, and then they went completely out of type there. So, yeah, maybe there's a reason that nobody wants to draft Jaylen Wright this year. And Ollie Gordon, running back 69 right now, ends up actually being the guy to be the second pitch here. So, and I'm not really all that interested in in drafting Miami Dolphins this year generally, so I'm not like going out of my way to take Jaylen Wright. But I'm so glad that you agree with me on what may be the most boring name that we've talked about so far, which is Roschon Johnson. Like, maybe DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson are not going to be Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. In fact, let me amend that statement. They're definitely not going to be that. But could they be like a facsimile of DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams in the early Detroit Lions days? I think there's a chance. Look, again, is Roschon Johnson going to lead the NFL in rushing touchdowns like Jamal Williams did that one year? Probably not. Probably not going to do that. But Jamal Williams was a boring ass back, and I say that lovingly. Like, I love a boring, reliable back that I drafted a lot that year, and that was something I actually got right. To have him as sort of like, hey, everybody overlooks him. People love DeAndre Swift as a pass catcher. And now people are starting to warm up to Swift. And I do think that Roschon Johnson's getting a little bit forgotten about here. Am I going to like pound the table for Roschon Johnson as like the sleeper this year? Hell no. I don't even know what Ben Johnson like really thinks of this guy. I think Ben Johnson is not going to tell us a lot about what he really thinks about these players until the pads come on, until we see them on the training camp, certainly in preseason, things of that nature. But I think he is completely kind of forgotten about in the fantasy industry right now. And why could he not have a role as kind of like a rugged goal line guy, short yardage sort of player?
No, I totally agree. So again, the Bucky Irving frame doesn't fit, but somebody who I would love on a best ball roster, so somebody as a roster filler, because Ben Johnson inherits all these guys, right? So you don't always know. A lot of times coaches tell us how they feel about their players much more by what they do than what they say. So you have to be careful with some of that and filter a lot of the coach speak through your own little BS detector before you come up with what matters. But one of the takeaways of the show is going to be I want Roschon Johnson to be one of your late round sleepers, knowing that he can't probably be a home run, but I could think he could easily be a single or a double and at least outkick the spot that you use to select him.
Oh, I think, potentially could really outkick it. And again, if the Bears offense hits and he's their goal line guy, dude, he was the goal line guy for the last coaching staff. So there's at least like a proof of concept here. Maybe he could, kind of fall into 9 touchdowns or something like that and end up being a useful player. And if DeAndre Swift gets hurt, then we're maybe talking about a starting level running back. So there are a couple other unsettled backfields I considered here. By the way, the Bears also drafted a rookie, Kyle Manungai. They drafted is kind of a 7th round guy. There's a couple of rookies that I didn't throw in the deep sleeper list, like from the Bears. Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt's getting some pop in Washington. Brashard Smith is a guy that's going super, super late for the Kansas City Chiefs, and he probably is in a mildly unsettled backfield. And Jordan Reed came on our show during Mock Draft Monday and hyped him up, so he's certainly somebody to earmark. But that's the thing with this exercise, Scott. Unsettled backfields, we could maybe talk about the 2 Jets guys, Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis behind Breece Hall. Like, this show could be 2 hours long because we could just sit here and name dudes that are going late in the draft. But any other like unsettled backfield guys that you think I may have missed?
I'm glad you mentioned Braylon Allen. He would have been the first guy I would have brought up. That I think it's open question to who the best running back is in New York, and it's crazy because a year or two ago nobody would have thought that was an open question. Now, unfortunately for the running backs they're just a lot of that pie is already belongs to Justin Fields, right? I mean, if Justin Fields plays a full season, he's going to run for 1,000 yards and 7 to 9 touchdowns. So that comes off the board right away. But Braylon Allen is still somebody I'm drafting proactively.
Let's talk through injury lottery tickets here to wrap up. I've got 4 names here. Trey Benson, running back 46, Arizona Cardinals. Ray Davis, running back 47, James Cook. Behind him there in Buffalo. James Cook also has got a little bit of a contract dispute going on, but I don't think anything is really going to come of that in terms of a holdout. Isaac Gurrendo, San Francisco 49ers, running back 48 behind Christian McCaffrey. And I also threw in Rico Dowdle here at running back 51, who actually does not fit our exercise because he's not on a rookie contract, but I do think I kind of thought like he's an interesting injury based upside guy, but he signed like a nothing 1-year deal. And they also took Trevor Etienne, Travis's brother, in the 4th round this year, which is on my radar a little bit. So I don't know maybe we just don't even consider Dowdle here because there's a chance he could be the running back 3 behind Etienne, who they took in, like I said, the 4th round. Maybe we're going to talk through all this, Scott, and Trevor Etienne is going to be the Bucky Irving of this year. I have no idea. Like I said, we're not going to get this right. So any of those names I just threw out there stand out to you as somebody that's interesting this year?
They're all interesting. I mean, Benson is behind James Conner, season 9, age 30. 4.6 YPC last year, and he did catch the ball in college. I realized they didn't throw the ball to Benson last year, but it's something that he can do. And Davis is playing behind a guy in Cook who scored 18 touchdowns. That infrastructure, Davis was a reasonable player when he was asked to play last year. Gurrendo, obviously, in the Shanahan offense. McCaffrey on the downside of his career, and he's had multiple injuries, a washout last year, but 3 of the last 5 seasons. If you drafted McCaffrey, you really felt that sting. And look, I'm a huge Chuba Hubbard fan, and they signed him to the extension. I mean, they're collectors in Carolina with running backs, right? They drafted Brooks early last year. He was a guy wait and see with injury. It sounds like that maybe even another washout year is coming for Brooks. They add Dowdle. They draft Etienne. The thing with Dowdle, and this is why it pains me, because I just want to get with Chuba Hubbard again, but Dowdle's a better receiver by every metric I care about. So I'm just worried that Dowdle, and it's funny that the money didn't speak. It wasn't much of a contract he signed, as you said. It's kind of a bet on myself. Let's have a good season and go back to the market sort of thing. I think Dowdle is going to be their best pass catcher and is going to have a role right away. So these are all interesting guys. It's a matter of what kind of player do you want, who might be playable right away, who might have some standalone value, and who might be its more contingent value. But these are, I think, to me, Tuten is one of the finalists. And I think the 2 other finalists are probably 2 of the 4 guys on this list.
Interesting. That's interesting. You bring up the receiving point with Dowdle, who I'm stunned didn't get any interest really in free agency and went to a team where he's a clear backup. Now, I do think that maybe he could eat into the workload a little bit, but they just paid Chuba Hubbard and he was awesome last year. But it's worth noting that Hubbard was the guy that got dinged up at the end of last year, which really hurt the team because he was just like you could tell the way Dave Canales and those guys were talking about him last year that they loved him, and then they gave him that extension mid-season. So, but maybe they don't want him to touch the ball like every single damn snap like he was last year. So Dowdle could be in the mix a little bit, might have some standalone value. Again, the pick of Etienne is on my radar here too. I always think that the 49ers are going to mix in somebody else to take the load off of McCaffrey, but when he's healthy, they just, Kyle Shanahan specifically cannot help himself. He just ends up playing him on every snap, which then we see what happens with Christian McCaffrey last year. But theoretically, I do think Gurrendo could be interesting there, but they also took Jordan James on day 3 of the draft this year. So very similar sort of situation there. Trey Benson and Ray Davis do stand out to me here, Scott. I'm very convinced that Ray Davis is good. And if James Cook missed time, I think we'd be ranking Ray Davis as a top 15 back on a weekly basis because I think he's good. He actually showed more as a pass catcher last year than I thought, and he plays for the Bills. Pretty easy equation. I am less bullish on Trey Benson after his rookie year, but I really liked him coming into the draft, and I thought that was a good situation for him to land in. And yeah, if James Conner misses time, I'm not so sure that I'm going to be just, waving Trey Benson into the starting running back rankings, but I do think that it's the right situation for a guy if James Conner does miss time.
Yeah, it would have been nice if Benson played more last year, and Conner has been surprisingly sturdy in the second chunk of his career. It felt like he was somebody we always expected to get hurt early on, and then he's been really durable lately. Arizona's offense is just, I struggle with where I'm at with Kyler Murray. And there's a guy who you see some games he runs through, some games he doesn't want to run at all. I know they're talking up what they're going to do with some of their creative running packages with Murray. I'll believe that when I see it. Everybody's got a great idea of how they're going to handle their offense in June. And a lot of those ideas are scrapped before the real games are actually played. But I guess how you feel about Arizona's offensive infrastructure has to play into this, because the problem with that Benson's going to have versus Davis or Gurrendo is the moment McCaffrey gets hurt, Gurrendo is going to be the talk of the fantasy town, because we've seen Shanahan be a kingmaker for fantasy running backs. And Davis is behind a guy in Cook who just scored 18 times last year. Even with Josh Allen having so much of the offense about him, Cook still scored 18 freaking times. I mean, you can't unsee that. I guess that ceiling can't be present for Benson. Just nobody views the Arizona offense the way we might view the Buffalo offense or San Francisco offense at peak.
All right. So we only have one finalist right now in Bhayshul Tuten, and we need to get to 3 before we vote here. And we've just like thrown a bunch of names at the wall. So Scott, I think the fairest thing to do is you get to name a finalist and I get to name a finalist, and then we vote on the 3 guys, including Tuten. So who do you want to just moonwalk into the finalist spot?
I have to have Isaac Gurrendo in there somewhere.
Okay. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. We've got to vote on Gurrendo. And for my pick, I mean, I want to say Jaydon Blue really bad, just because I can't. I've like pilled myself into this now because like, he's the same size of Bucky Irving, which is so stupid. But so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say Ray Davis for the other one here because I've seen him play. I am pretty convinced he's good, and it's the Bills' offense and the Bills' run game. So, okay, Scott, we settle this as we always do. We order them 1 to 3. Most to least likely to be this year's Bucky Irving. I give you Bhayshul Tuten. I give you Isaac Gurrendo. I give you Ray Davis. Put them in order.
I'm going to put them in the order you mentioned them. Tuten 1, Gurrendo 2, and Davis 3. The Liam Cohen factor can't be overlooked. And the fact that Cohen inherited everybody else in that Jacksonville backfield, they prioritized Tuten on draft day. So he's going to be my number 1 guy. But these are 3 players. I hope I'm going to have shares of all 3 of these guys when the draft season is over.
Yeah, if anything, this episode has convinced me that there's some interesting late round bets to make this year. Most of them won't work out. That's what betting is. Most of your bets aren't going to work out either. You're probably you're hoping to hit like 60%. We're not going to hit 60% on this show.
We call them lottery tickets for a reason. Most lottery tickets are worthless. I mean,
exactly. But I think we've outlined some good paths as to how some of these guys could be relevant. Like I said, Roschon Johnson, we're not talking about in this exercise, but I do think he's worth a late round dart throw. Like Jaydon Blue, we talked about. There's a lot of interesting guys here. In terms of our 3 finalists, though, I am going to put it in Bhayshul Tuten, Ray Davis, Isaac Gurrendo. So congratulations. We had all of this whole conversation, Scott, to get to the chalk answer, which is if there is going to be a this year's Bucky Irving, it is Bhayshul Tuten, and the industry is kind of, like I said, already hip to this one. It's the guy that was coached by Liam Cohen this year after coaching Bucky Irving last year. So like I said, it was a chalk answer, but I do think if you are trying to project, this is probably the most likely scenario.
Yeah, now I wish we had like some documentary series going on with the Jaguars because I want to see Cohen coaching up Trevor Lawrence. I want to see what Hunter's doing on offense and defense. I want to see what the running back room looks like. I want to see Brian Thomas in year 2. What a player he was last year on a sinking ship, and he was just dynamite and always open and playing so well despite the quarterback play around him. It's been a while since the Jacksonville Jaguars were this interesting. I mean, you could argue this is the most interesting Jaguars team they've had since the team that should have beaten the Patriots in the AFC Championship game a decade ago, or maybe even some of those Mark Brunell teams back in the 90s. I mean, I don't know if the Jaguars are going to be good. They're going to be fun, though. They're going to be a team that we have to take seriously for fantasy because of Cohen. And Lawrence is still so young. I can't imagine every scout was wrong on Trevor Lawrence when he came out of college. So I don't know if maybe I missed something. Maybe there is a documentary in place. Maybe they've signed a deal with HBO or with Netflix or something like that. But I would watch it. I would watch All Access Jaguars. I would certainly be a subscriber.
Yeah, they're going to be a fun team to discuss this offseason. I just hope they're a fun team to watch in the regular season because, man, there's so many parts of this team that are very interesting. I loved Cohen's offense last year. I can't wait to see what he does with the head coaching gig. There's also other interesting coaches on that roster as well. Grant Udinski with the Minnesota Vikings last year. He's somebody people are really excited about. Like we talked, Tuten's got a good example of a good path to being a fantasy breakout player. Travis Hunter, Brian Thomas Jr., that's box office. The offensive line does not look like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on paper, but it could be a unit that takes a little bit of a jump after some additions this offseason and maybe just, again, an improved scheme overall. So, Scott, we're going to be talking about...
Let me ask you this. Do you have any interest in Brenton Strange, their tight end?
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, okay. I actually just redid my rankings recently, and I gave him a little bump up because he was way too low. And I mean, just like right now, he's the tight end 22 in ADP. There's a bunch of dudes here like Kyle Pitts, the rookies. Like he could easily outproduce a guy like Colston Loveland because he's the clear tight end 1 on that team. But again, we're counting a lot on Jacksonville Jaguars in fantasy this year. And like, when has that ever gone wrong for us before, Scott?
You just gave me I think I'm going to break out in highs because you mentioned Kyle Pitts' name. If Kyle Pitts does it this year, it's not going to be on my watch. I've given up that chase. I wanted to give him all the pass when they lost Arthur Smith. It's like, okay, it was Arthur Smith's fault. He'll do better with Cousins. Okay, maybe he'll do better with Penix. Maybe Kyle Pitts just isn't that good.
By the way, perfect player. Perfect player to end it on, by the way, Scott, because he fits exactly with what I was talking about earlier, where he was the apple of the eye of the fantasy community, all these accounts tweeting about Kyle Pitts. And now there's like not a player that is cyberbullied in fantasy football more than Kyle Pitts. And Kyle Pitts was on the show a couple years ago. It's like, yeah, I hate fantasy. I don't get fantasy at all. I wonder why. I wonder why. All the players that love fantasy love it until they're bad in fantasy.
It makes me sad that people can't separate. These guys are human beings. I can talk about Kyle Pitts as a player. I'm not going to go on his Twitter account and add him and say anything about it. Not to mention, if these guys were in your backyard, you would think every player was Jerry Rice. You would think every player was Randy Moss or whoever you view, Lawrence Taylor, whoever you view as Tom Brady. These guys would all be superheroes. And they're people. Treat them as people. Don't what's that saying with social media? Don't say anything on social media that you wouldn't say in front of somebody and to their face. So, just be a human being about it. It's really simple. It's not difficult. Let's just be nice to each other. And if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. Really simple.
Very simple. And we said a lot of nice things about a lot of running backs here that probably will not matter in fantasy football at all this year. But that is why I love this episode. Like I said, even if I dreaded the topic a little bit, it's a fun episode to talk about these scenarios where, hey, these guys could actually end up being real difference makers in fantasy. So, Scott, I appreciate you joining me for this one. What are you working on right now that people can check out?
Yeah, a lot of fantasy baseball content. Is Cal Raleigh having the best fantasy catcher season of all time? That's something I wrote up this week, and I'll be doing a lot of football content as well. I want you to check out, I talked about players who are regression win players who can play a lot worse than they did in the previous season, but still win because their ADPs are reasonable. Cortland Sutton is one of the guys on that list. I wrote the tight ends and wide receivers for that recently. So check out my byline at Yahoo, a lot of fantasy baseball content. And of course, because it's the 12-month season now, Matt, a lot of fantasy football content.
I love it. And that's a good series. I might have to check that out because that's always something we throw on. Oh, this guy's going to regress. Well, yeah, what if his ADP already implies that he's going to regress and he could still be a profitable pick there? So that's a good one. Definitely make sure you check out that content from Scott there. In the meantime, that is going to do it for our show. We're going to be back with the final edition of Flip the Script next week. Who is going to be this year's Sam Darnold, the quarterback resurrected player? I get this wrong every single year. Never been on the right side of history, so I'm hoping to finally get it right this year, but I probably won't. But we're going to talk about it next week, Wednesday, July 2nd. Anyways, until then, we are out.